Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, January 6th. January 6th, 2022. It's a year since that day. And, oh, by the way, yeah, I feel sorry for everybody whose birthday is today. I've seen a couple of people acknowledging as much on Twitter. Sorry, we hope we can make the stain of the day go away, but it might be one of those that sticks with us for a little while. Maybe a generation, maybe we'll forget after that. Who knows? At any rate, we didn't yet know just how bad things were going to get, so about this time last year, they waited until after the show to make things really terrible down there. It was very considerate of them, all things considered. It was nice of them to do. That's the best thing we can say about them. Lots of, takes, hot and cold, today being offered, and of course you can temper your diet of January 6th news and takes, if you want, by diverting attention to the latest, weird Nate Silver take, which is that, I'm sure you've seen it or seen it discussed, that, I don't know, for some weird reason he decided to compare the closure of schools during the height of the pandemic, or what might not even be the height of the pandemic, but one of the previous heights of the pandemic, compared to as a policy disaster on a par with the Iraq War, which feels weird and wrong. Although I have also seen other people agree with it, which I also, obviously feel is weird and wrong, but some people still insisting that it was a disastrous decision. I think it was probably the only decision we could make at the time, and probably saved us a lot of heartache and death. But hey, that's a good comparison to make to the Iraq War, which was itself a cause of heartache and death, and probably should have been avoided. But I don't know. Just seems like a weird comparison to make. I don't think Nate Silver has any kids or any kids of school age, but of course he's speaking politically. He's letting everyone know just how elected Dems ought to be feeling about the decision, and I have no idea where he's coming from on that one. Okay. Well, at any rate, that's all I've got to say about that one. That feels weird and stupid, and he insists on remaining in that position, and that's fine. What do I care? I've never bothered with him, and he's never interested me. I've never been a data guy anyway, so and data people can just as easily dismiss their connection with him. So I imagine that'll be happening a lot today, too. All right, we'll catch up on all those other things. As you know, the former guy has canceled his Pervalago press conference, so that won't be happening. Pushing it until the 15th, when he'll give it at a super spreader event in Arizona, which, by the way, Arizona, I think, has crept up in the stats to, which one was it? Is it, I think probably it might be overall rate of deaths per million in throughout the pandemic, up to second place, I think, right behind Mississippi at this point. It used to be Alabama, just behind him, and I think Arizona took him over in the last day or two. So great place to go for a super spreader event. And honestly, if he spreads it to enough Republicans who are unvaccinated and sends enough of them to the hospital, I might, have to donate to keep him going to make sure that he does more of these things. At this point, if you're vaccinated, and if you are vaccinated and wearing masks, you want nothing to do with a Trump rally. And if you're a member of the press, don't cover it. So there's really no excuse to go. Now it's just the perfect bioweapon to use against the MAGA troops. And it's by their own design, and they keep building the same bomb and setting it off inside their crowds. And I don't know what else to say other than, while it's should be viewed as a humanitarian crisis and perhaps a crime against humanity on the part of Donald Trump, can't seem to stop him with the laws of the United States. Maybe at this point, international law has to step in. The Hague might have something to say at this point, since domestic law enforcement won't do anything about it. But as long as he's doing it, I wish him the greatest success in taking out the greatest number. It seems to be his goal, and I can only say I back him in this. There are a few things in which we will agree. You can't disagree on everything. I could recommend you don't do these things, but you're not going to listen to me. So all I'm saying is I'm going to talk past your resistance and describe what's going on. All right. Well, that ought to let you know that the Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. In case that didn't, the chimes of our Skype call will do the trick for us. Instead, let me, I'll inform you, finish up on what Bill was saying here. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Now you know Greg's here too. Today, Kagro spends 2 hours discussing, and it looks like it's right so far, all the things that are so wonderful about puppies, rainbows, and the smell of apple pies cooling on the windowsills. That would have been a better idea. Because what else is there to discuss? Besides, of course, today's anniversary. So, good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning.
Door? No, thank you. Anybody at your door today trying to burst in and tell you you're no longer the homeowner and you should sign it over to them?
No, yeah, we had some plumbing issues yesterday, but they appear to be all under control, which is a good thing. We had an ice storm. We lost power for about 4 hours, so we had no water, we had no electricity, and it was fine.
Good. Well,
because,
nice
when people are actually under real stress, like the hospitals, this is nothing.
Yeah, well, you weren't treating any patients there, luckily. So.
Right, everybody was healthy and we were fine.
Good. All right, well, glad everything's on the mend.
So, this pandemic is still going on. Yeah, we're going to spend a lot of time on January 6th today because, it's January 6th.
Right.
But did you actually quote the Nate Silver tweet that led to a lot of this?
No.
He said, suppose you think that school closures were a disastrous invasion of Iraq magnitude or perhaps greater policy decision. Shouldn't that merit some further reflection?
Suppose you think.
And then, having tweeted something which was controversial, you do the Twitter thing, and then you spend the next 2 hours defending what you just said as if there was no possibility that you could in any way, shape, or form be wrong. So, there were a lot of response to it. My favorite you probably know of the Twitter account Dick Nixon, Richard M. Nixon, a fellow who has studied Nixon and tweets in the persona of Nixon and talks about politics and baseball, the things Nixon was interested in. And so, sometimes he's spot on. I think he was in this case. He tweet quoted Nate Silver and said, Nate, do you ever think about death?
I guess not. He left that out of the equation.
The only response to Nate Silver on politics or policy is, shouldn't you be counting cards somewhere?
Basically. I don't know why he involves himself in these things. He should be doing what he likes.
Right. And somebody else also said, La Fata Morgana added, do you understand the meaning of the concept of death, that it's like forever and it's people's loved ones? A loved one is another human you feel a special bond with. Just in case you don't know.
Yeah, right. Well,
I mean, this is weird stuff. And so, when people just fatuously tweet out, I happen to think this is a big policy decision and everybody who disagrees with me is completely wrong. And I dismiss all of your complaints because you don't get it and only I do.
Yeah.
It's a little rough. You're going to have a rough day.
Well, it was an interesting premise. We should try out others like it. And, I mean, he could defend what he had to say by saying, well, just if you believe that, we should have some further reflection. If you believe school is taught by professional cadre of kangaroos and not teachers, don't you think that merits discussion? Well, yes, if someone believes that, it probably does merit discussion. Maybe with a psychiatrist, but a discussion nonetheless. But obviously, I guess
John Levy, who's a Boston University School of Public Health guy, is actually the chair of their environmental health department, said, going remote for a few days is not school closure. Wearing a higher quality mask is not lockdown.
Right.
Giving people access to free tests is not shutting down the economy. Can we acknowledge that there's something between doing nothing and returning to spring 2020 and then do it?
Yeah. That would be nice.
Right. At the same time, what's going on now is to a certain extent, schools are closing. Chicago is kind of a special case. Schools are closing because staff is sick.
Yes. And
it was interesting. Somebody actually pointed out that back in the 1917-18 era, with the great influenza,
It was great.
In California, there were upper-class areas that closed down for a couple of weeks.
Oh, okay.
And the newly segregated Mexican schools stayed open.
Well,
so the point is, like, we've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
And in fact, when you try to argue from the point of view as the schools have to stay open because the parents demand it, the question is, of course, which parents? Because lower income people of color often actually preferred remote. Mm-hmm. Which always gets blown off. So whenever you read stuff like, well, here's what people think, it's like, well, that's what you think. And often, you're arguing that from a position of privilege, and you don't recognize it. So I don't think there's a right or wrong here. I personally think as much as possible the schools should stay open, but that doesn't mean they can stay open. Chris Hayes asked a very interesting question last night, at least on Twitter. I don't know about his show. I didn't see it.
I'm sure that was interesting, too.
And said, we spent like $1 million per school. What did they do with the money? And I said, well, deep cleaning, maybe?
Some.
And in fact, I have an article from Connecticut in the middle of all of that, like 6 months ago, about how the New Haven schools were devoted to deep cleaning, and they thought it was really important.
Yes.
And see, the point is that COVID is an airborne disease. And so if you didn't spend the money on ventilation and you spent it on deep cleaning, Chris Hayes is very right to ask the money. It doesn't mean that the schools didn't spend it on other good things, for the staff and otherwise. Yes. Money spent on staff is a good thing. But, the real question underlying his question is, what did we do to make the schools safer? Yes. Sure, if you invested the money in remote learning because you needed to at the time, that all makes sense. And if you had to shore up some staff issues with emergency funding, that's fine. It all makes sense. Whatever's good for the staff. But did you spend it on ventilation? And I asked that because just last week, there was a project from UConn to give 100, cheap $100 hepatite filters to local schools.
Here you go. Okay.
Now, right? So that's only 100 schools, and it's a pilot project, and that's only now. What was done over the last year? I mean, so Chris Hayes is right to ask that question. Yes. And so the point is that closing or opening the schools is a really fraught question. You know that politically. You live in Loudoun. I don't need to tell you that. But also from a public health point of view, forget about the politics, just in terms of what's the right thing. Mm-hmm. The right thing is to try to get the kids to learn. And, it's not like you have to keep the schools open no matter what, the way the new mayor of New York, Eric Adams, says. If the staff is sick and they can't come in, and maybe it's good to take a 1 or 2 week hiatus and add 1 or 2 weeks at the end of the school year. That can be done. It's not the biggest deal in the world. Maybe it's safer.
Yes, that might even be better
It's not the war in Iraq.
In learning. Well, I heard it was, but I mean, it might not be. That's true. Shouldn't it merit discussion whether it is or isn't? I think so.
Well, what the term "shouldn't this merit discussion," shouldn't we be discussing this, is code for it. Look, I have a point of view and I'm right, and why don't you discuss how I'm right?
Yeah, couched in terms meant to make it unassailable, but it got assailed. And rightly so. By the way, about the things that the schools spent money on, it does bring us back to another interesting point and an overarching and recurring theme in government spending, right? We realize now, the money was doled out, but without any particular guidance as to, well, what would be a good use of this? Because, of course, each system might have its own needs. And we were told the local control is the way to go, and that's the way to make sure the money is the best spent and the least waste, fraud, and abuse.
Absolutely. See, tobacco money.
Yeah, and guess what?
Tobacco money was used to lower your taxes, but it was supposed to be for safety and health issues. Well, it is, indirectly.
Right. If you use your
because raising my salary ultimately will allow me to vote down the road for some health things, and so it's all related.
Yeah, that's good. Right. I was just going to say you could take your tax refund and go to the gym with it and buy a membership. I don't know. There's lots of different ways to use money. Deep cleaning continues, by the way, and people do still do this. There are lots of schools that did in fact, replace their ventilation systems, and that's good. And a lot of schools, it's good that the money was flexible because, of course, if the instruction was everybody change your HVAC systems and go to higher filtration, etc., and then the schools, I did that last year, pre-pandemic, just because it was good. We were replacing the system anyway. What do I do now? You can clean the place, I guess. I don't know, but everybody would have their own needs. But there was no guidance forthcoming. And remember who was in charge when we did this. There was no chance that they were going to allow for federal intervention and top-down instructions about what can and can't be done with the money.
Right. I have to be very honest. And yes, this is going to be a controversial thing to say.
Uh-oh. Iraq War.
But 12 and up can now get boosted.
Oh, okay.
If you have opinions on how to keep the schools safe and you didn't get your kids boosted, vaccinated, and of course it's not fair that since you can only get boosted as of last night, I expect everybody to be boosted. I simply expect you to have an appointment already, or at least try.
But if
you didn't do that and you want to lecture people on what makes the schools safe,
Yeah, well, look, Nate Silver just wants to have a say in your children's education. What's wrong with that?
How do you keep schools safe? And this is, for the parents, and this is for the teachers.
Yeah.
Vaccines and testing.
Yes.
High quality masks. That means more than just a cloth mask.
Yep.
And ventilation.
Yeah,
those are the tools. Use them.
Okay. Or Iraq War.
Or Iraq War. You can do that too.
Yeah.
Speaking of Iraq War, that's going to take us right into a discussion about January 6th. So I just want to finish up on this pandemic stuff.
Oh, all right. Sure.
So it's still going on. Everything we seem to learn about where the numbers are going still seems to hold. Looking at New York City numbers, the decoupling of cases and ICU. The stress in the hospitals right now is on the emergency rooms, the emergency departments, as we call it in the trade, EDs. And a lot of people coming, and they range from the worried well who should not come, people who need testing for one reason or another and can't find it anywhere else, people who, of course, have other things going on and still need the emergency room because, like, if you get into a car accident, you can't wait till February when things slow down a little bit. So the big pressure is on the emergency rooms, and my local paper has a big headline, banner headline. The numbers are obscene. And what they're talking about is pressure on the emergency rooms. Now, inpatients, a lot of people getting admitted, both with and for. The distinction doesn't matter nearly as much as people think, as we talked about yesterday, because if your underlying condition was exacerbated by COVID, but you were admitted for the underlying condition, you're counted as a with, but it's really for, and there's a lot of that. And then the ICUs are relatively spared, and that's what's happening locally as well. But it's the number one story in all of our local papers. The number one story nationally, however, is January 6th. And there's some really interesting pieces that are going around, which for various and sundry reasons, and far too many to actually talk about because there's just so many good ones. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of these.
The ones we saw and liked.
The ones we saw and liked.
Yeah.
The ones that we could fit. All the news that fits, we print.
Yep. All right.
So here's new news. Deeply reported piece in Axios, sneak peek last night on the January 6th committee. Mike Pence's former staff has been particularly cooperative with the committee.
I can imagine.
The committee's ramping up its closed-door work with the goal of holding public hearings as early as this spring. To me, that's March.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure.
So 2 months. Some of the most helpful information has come from second and third tier administration staff who were not directly involved but were at the White House on January 6th and had access to the officials. The other way to read that is these are the people who are going to get asked to be subpoenaed and don't have the resources and wherewithal to fight all of this stuff infinitely. They can't fundraise. They're not going to get funded by the same people who are funding Mark Meadows' defense and so on and so forth. Trump isn't going to help them. So they realize it's like financial ruin or cooperate. So they're cooperating. Good. And many of those officials, Elena Treen reports, met solely with the committee's Republican members, Cheney and Kinzinger.
Oh, that's interesting.
So what's the point of having these two people on the committee? Well, this is the point. Well, they're just, I don't like their votes everywhere else, and they're really, look, they're doing what they're supposed to do here.
There's not a lot of complaints.
It was a brilliant move to put them on.
Yeah, I mean, well...
You think that's controversial? That's a hill I'll die on.
I don't know that there's a lot. Honestly... I know there's a lot of Democrats who still say, well, they're still Republicans and Cheney is still Cheney, but I don't know how many people... I guess somebody must be complaining, but I think they've probably seen the benefit of it by now.
Yeah, well, Cheney's Cheney. She knows how Washington works. How's that bad?
Well, it's not by itself. But don't lose sight of the fact that she's Cheney. But okay, this job is being done well.
If the Iraq War vote comes up in this committee, fine, I'll take your point.
It could. It came up in school closures just yesterday.
So, I see why you're bringing it up, but honestly, it's a relatively low risk. No,
I actually bring it up to say I think that everybody's handling it pretty well. There's very few people, if any, that I've seen who say that no, her work on the committee is invalid as a result of my priors with her on Iraq. People say I remember it and I won't forget it, but okay, this is good.
Right. So I do think that's some pretty amazing stuff.
With you, yeah. They're with you. You got support.
You. A reminder where we were a year ago.
Yes. You want to get that?
I don't, but I'm playing blank out the
You
four
do a
rings.
really good job with this, yeah. He hits the mute button, he knows the timing
Okay, one more
of the
ringy dingy,
rings.
and I'll be back.
Hello. Okay.
Okay, there it is.
Good job. Well done.
Achievement unlocked. You've increased a level. So 57% of Americans want Republican President Donald Trump to be immediately removed from office after he encouraged a protest this week that escalated into a deadly riot inside the U.S. Capitol, according to a Reuters Ipsos poll. That was January 8th, 2021. Mm-hmm. So the point is, at the time, people saw that it was a deadly riot, and at the time, people saw Trump being responsible.
He was. That's true.
Okay, just a reminder. And this one is by Christian Paz in The Atlantic, January 6th and 30,000 feet. Stuck on a plane flying back to Washington. I feared the version of the country I would land in. Mm-hmm. I tuned into CNN and several questions raced through my mind. How organized was the mob? Would police open fire on the crowd? This was real-time thinking. Where was Nancy Pelosi? Where was Mike Pence? Would the fighting outside reach the lawmakers trapped inside? Think of the images you now see being played. And today, by the way, is going to be played all day. All the cables are going to, this is the thing that we're concentrating on. Okay. So it's a reminder to everybody who forgot, which will be interesting to see whether it has any effect whatsoever on public opinion. But this was a January 6, 2022 essay about January 6, 2021. Where was Mike Pence? Would the fighting outside reach the lawmakers trapped inside? I recoiled as images of an armed standoff on the House floor hit the screen, and my eyes stung when Wolf Blitzer reported that protesters had taken the Senate chamber.
Yes.
My mind wandered to a scene from The Handmaid's Tale in which June Osborne and her husband watched the massacre of Congress on television before a coup. Now I was watching tear gas being deployed in the Capitol Rotunda.
Uh-huh.
Our plane kept flying. By this point, we were less than an hour out from Reagan in a new dread swell. What happens when we land? Are insurrectionists causing mayhem at the airport?
Yeah,
would I be able to get home that night? Mayor Muriel Bowser had imposed a 6 p.m. curfew. Would the metro and car services be running? Could martial law be declared? Trump allies had discussed this in the days leading up to the attack, and it seemed like a real threat that night.
It was.
And I just want to remind people of how that feels because of two twin, if you will, think pieces, if you want to be kind, and call them that in the Wall Street Journal.
I get it. Yes. All right.
Okay. And the first one.
Yeah. What do you got? You
may see, okay, fine, whatever. Liz Cheney is still a Republican, yada, yada, yada. This one's from Karl Rove.
Yeah.
Going along with our January 6th is the Iraq War theme today for some reason. That's because a lot of the players are the same. Boy, you should see some of Ari Fleischer's tweets. Oh. They're awful. But as people reminded, it was funny, in a way. Ari Fleischer said something, trying to explain away what went on January 6th, and it was an awful take. And somebody responded, if you think these are awful, you should see what he said back in 2003.
Yeah, well, yes, he's a bad guy.
Anyway, this one from Karl Rove.
Yeah, I don't know if I believe Karl Rove, but okay, he did
Republicans' January 6th responsibility. The GOP has a duty to condemn the riot and those who refuse to acknowledge it.
Okay, I mean, I think so. I just didn't know that he thought so.
Okay, so among the things he says, let's stipulate that while the thousands who went to the Capitol a year ago were wrong to insist the election was stolen, most weren't violent as they exercised their First Amendment rights to gather peacefully in the mall. Mm-hmm. But last year, there were several thousand protesters willing to use force to disrupt Congress in its constitutional duty to receive and certify the electoral vote, clearly making a difference between the people who went to the mall and the people who went to the Capitol. Right? First is allowed, First Amendment. Second, not so much.
Yeah,
right? You can't go to the Capitol and trash and take the Senate floor.
That's
and
true.
Tear gas in the Capitol rotunda.
Well,
that's different than protesting on the mall. Everybody protests on the mall.
Sure,
it's tradition. It's good.
Favorite
right?
Place for
Taking
it.
the Capitol, bad. We'll do more of this after the break, but that's important when you come to see what the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal had to say about it.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, and I did see that Karl Rove had done this thing, and I guess I have to learn to decide whether I can just take it at face value.
Well, you like what he says after the break.
Okay. Well, then good. But again, he's still Karl Rove. But that's okay.
No, she's still Liz Cheney. And
that's right. Yeah. Yet it happened. Even if they're trying to cover
their
their
Well, they can do some good, even from their positions.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Ready? Is everyone ready and back and settled into a comfortable chair to find out why you're on Karl Rove's side?
Why we care about what Karl Rove said?
Yeah. All right. We're ready.
So
I'm prepared. I'm on the floor already.
Right. So Karl Rove made a very important distinction between the peaceful protesters at the mall and the not-so-peaceful protesters, 750 or so already prosecuted, who broke into the Capitol.
Yes. There were more.
To do violence.
Right. There's no reason to be breaking into the Capitol, fellows.
Right, as he calls it, the moment's savagery.
Oh, eloquent. Okay.
Led astray by stronger wills with dangerous motives. To move beyond January 6th, he later says, we must put country ahead of party. Well, there's a good thought. For Democrats, that means resisting their leadership's petty habit of aggravating partisan fault lines by indiscriminately condemning all who came to Washington that day. I don't see anybody doing that, but if anybody does that, don't. You're allowed to go to the mall and protest.
Right.
You're not allowed to break into the Capitol. We Republicans have a heavier burden. I've been a Republican my entire life and believe in what the Republican Party at its best has represented for decades. There can be no soft peddling what happened. No absolution for those who planned, encouraged, and aided the attempt to overthrow our democracy. Love of country demands nothing less. That's true patriotism.
Okay.
And you read that and you say, okay, nice. I agree with all of that. That's fine. Yes, I know it's Karl Rove. Yes, I know if the protesters had won, he'd be with Ari Fleischer explaining why it was okay. Mm-hmm. But that's not the point. This is what happened, and this is what he said. And it's in the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal, and contrasts with another piece that's in the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal from the editors themselves, where they claim in a both sides way, and that's why it's so interesting to see that contrasted with what Rove says. Rove says, if you broke into the Capitol, you had violence on your mind, this was an insurrection, you're responsible, Republicans have to take responsibility for calling it out, it's our duty as patriots. Okay? And he says again, no soft peddling what happened, no absolution for those who planned, encouraged, and aided the attempt to overthrow our democracy. Contrast what Rove said with what the editorial board said, Wall Street Journal editorial board. One lesson is that on all the available evidence, January 6th was not an insurrection in any meaningful sense of the word. It wasn't an attempted coup. The Justice Department and the House Select Committee have looked high and low for a conspiracy, and maybe they'll find it. So far they haven't. Worse, what Trump did is he failed to act. That's to jump a little bit, trying to explain away Trump didn't do this, Trump didn't do that. But worse, he failed to act to stop the riot, even as he watched on TV in the White House. Even the Wall Street Journal editorial board gets that piece. That's the part where he might be criminally negligent there. He failed to act despite the pleading of family and allies. This was a monumental failure of character and duty. Republicans have gone mute on this dereliction. Now, this is the one in defense of what happened.
But yeah.
Republicans have gone mute on the dereliction as they try to stay united for the midterms. But they'll face a reckoning on this with voters if Mr. Trump runs in 2024. But as for the Pelosi Democrats, the question is, when will they ever let January 6th go? The latest news, well, today's January 6th. Not today, buddy. The latest news is that the Speaker's Select Committee may hold primetime hearings this year, and the leaks are that they may even see an indictment of Mr. Trump for obstructing Congress. Really? Their constitutional power runs to impeachment, and they've already impeached Trump twice. As our friends at the New York Sun note, such a prosecutorial inquiry runs close to what the Constitution bars as a bill of attainder against a single individual. As a way of harming Mr. Trump's future prospects, we suspect it would work about as well as both impeachments did. So, we shouldn't be bickering about who assaulted who. This is a happy occasion.
Of course.
As Monty Python once said about a lovely wedding that didn't end well.
Unbelievable. Well, that was pretty serious garbage.
But that's the serious garbage that the Republican Party has as their official position. Looking at the Wall Street Journal editorial page as an organ of the McConnell wing, you get an idea of where they're coming from, and that's why looking at what Rove wrote in contrast to that is so interesting.
Okay, I can buy that. By the way, there's a million things to take exception with in the editorial, but I happen to, my ears perked up at one of the excuses made about Republicans going mute about the dereliction. They haven't. Not even really your wing of the Republican Party. It's actually that they've spoken up affirmatively in defense of it and called it something other than dereliction. They've defended Trump.
Which is why the whole stop the steal argument is still going on.
Yeah.
The big lie. Right? And they're part of it, and they aid and abet it in various and sundry ways.
Yeah. If they were mute, things would be better. He wouldn't be able to, perpetuate this lie quite so easily. But the fact that even the careful, moderate, contemplative Republicans, when they're pinned down on TV and an interviewer asks them who won the election, they say, well, look, I believe Joe Biden is the president, but,
but really, Democrats are going too far by trying to hold Republicans accountable.
Yeah. Whatever it is.
For what they did and what they're still doing.
Yep. So, okay.
Well, why wouldn't you want to hold them accountable for what they did and what they're still doing? That's the whole point of a criminal referral to justice.
I don't know.
Which, by the way, Merrick Garland addressed yesterday.
Yes,
and of course, since he didn't indict Trump, some people will not be happy, but it was, pretty straightforward. We take this seriously, and we think this is a big deal.
Okay.
Well, that's what you want to hear from the Department of Justice, and we're going to be fair about it.
Generally speaking.
That's what we want to hear from the Department of Justice, and that's what we want them to do. And it's going to be slower than you want. Well, we didn't want to hear that, but
but that's what
true.
The Department of Justice says. That's the things they say.
Yeah, it's the thing they say.
There's a script.
There it is.
All right.
Now, here's another piece that looks at January 6th, which I think covers an extremely important part of this, which we cover on the show all the time, but I think still gets lost on people. Mm-hmm. And it's from one guy by the name of Robert P. Jones. You may recognize him. He's the CEO of PRRI, which is a public poll that looks at the intersection of religion and politics, and is often the only poll that actually looks at what individual areas of religion feel on political and social issues.
Okay.
And that's how we know that white evangelicals are different than mainline Protestants and different than the rest of the country in terms of how they look at insurrection, for example, because PRI poll tells us that. But he has a piece written December 31st, 2021, so just a week ago, looking back, facing white Christianity's role in the January 6th insurrection. White Christians have only begun the work of reckoning with white supremacy.
Oh. I'm
Pretty
glad
nice
they've
story
begun.
Here that really has to be part of this.
I hear Blue Jays at your house, man.
You do?
Yeah. Is that what's achieving? No?
No, I don't hear anything.
Are they at our house? That's it.
Of course,
hey,
I have these earphones on. So.
Okay. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I hear them. I guess I wouldn't have. I thought I would have heard them not through my earphones, so I thought maybe it was coming over your microphone. You have the bird feeder out, but it's probably not near the microphone, is it?
No.
All right. Well, they must be near our house.
But you know Blue Jays when you hear them.
Okay.
So the year opened with a violent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol in which angry Trump supporters, with the former president's encouragement, attempted to prevent the certification of the lawful and fair 2020 election. Among the predominantly white mob on January 6, Christian symbols, prayers, and rhetoric mixed freely with a sickening cocktail of lies, conspiracies, racism, and anti-Semitism.
Yes. Bad cocktail.
And, just as an aside, and I'll see if I still have this. I think I put this away somewhere. Here it is. A very interesting place is called uncivilreligion.org.
And they have Blue Jays.
Maybe they do.
Okay.
And here's what's interesting about it. Let me just read from their tweet. We are proud to announce Uncivil Religion. It's a new digital resource tracing the threads of religion throughout the events at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th and developed in collaboration with the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History.
Interesting.
Right? It's the first online project that's benefited from input from this person and that person, but it's a helpful collection of resources, and therefore, when Robert P. Jones says, among the predominantly white mob on January 6, Christian symbols, prayers, and rhetoric mixed freely with a sickening cocktail of lies, conspiracies, racism, and anti-Semitism, it's documented. And you can actually go to that site and look at it. And it's a real nice accompaniment to this article.
All right.
We passed a grim pandemic milestone in 2021, more than 800,000 deaths. I think we're up to like 830. And we've seen not one, but two surges of new COVID. So I find myself once again desperately wanting to turn the page on 2022, but ahead of the one-year anniversary of the January 6th insurrection, I'm sharing my thoughts on Christianity's role in supporting the white supremacist-driven violence on display that day. The full piece was originally written as an afterword to the paperback edition of my book, White Too Long, and was also published at Religion News Service.
Okay.
But I think it's important, and I want to give it to you.
All right.
Comfortably intermingled with these tributes, he writes, to white supremacy were Christian symbols and rhetoric, numerous Bibles, crosses, Jesus saves, signs and Jesus 2020 flags that mirrored the design of the Trump campaign flag. And he gives a couple of images, and it'll be interesting later to go and see if it's on that online archive, but I give you one of the pictures here.
I believe it, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
U.S. Capitol riot was a stain. And these unsettling connections among white supremacy, white Christianity, and support for the former president are not confined to the extremists who attacked the Capitol. There's a strong correlation between voting for Trump in 2020 and median scores on the racism index among white Christian subgroups, something we talked about throughout Trump's entire term. There are so many white evangelical Protestants who are the base of Trump's campaign. It helps to explain one of the reasons why it's pointless arguing with them about policy. These are the folks that just need to be outvoted.
Yes,
it's that everybody else that's surrounding them potentially could be reached by a day like today, where the news media is going to really focus on January 6th. These folks will explain it away and say, just a flesh wound. You guys are just exaggerating too much.
Yeah, right. Well, they can explain anything. I mean, if you are willing to say, God did it, or you're not supposed to understand it.
Right. Well, there it is. Right.
Right.
So, one of the a couple of famous names are really right at the center of that intersection.
Bob Jones. Yeah.
The My Pillow guy.
Right.
Right. And Mike
I
Flynn.
forgot he's religious. Yes. Okay.
Right. Which also brings in what role did the armed forces play in this, and the whole issue of what was going on January 6th that they didn't show up. And what is the Army doing about extremists and all the other stuff that's been in the news? I mean, so that's a subtext to January 6th, and it's all part and parcel of what's going on. Meanwhile, in the real world, this is from January 4th from NPR. Here's where election-denying candidates are running to control voting.
Everywhere.
They
have specific examples. Okay.
They have specific examples. 15
everywhere.
Specific examples in multiple states, 8 states, 9 states. Election doubters and deniers running for Secretary of State in 2022.
Okay.
In Georgia, Representative Jody Hice, that's probably the leading one that everybody knows about.
Yeah.
It's a Biden +2 state. Hice objected to certification in Congress on January 6th and has Trump endorsement. In Arizona, State Representative Mark Fincham, who attended Stop the Steal rallies in January, spoke of election fraud in Virginia before that state's governor's race, so you may be well familiar with him. Also Trump endorsed, so those are the 2 out of the 3 Trump endorsed one. The third one is in Michigan. Christina Caramo published 2020 election conspiracy theories and conspiracy theory that it was actually Antifa, Antifa, who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. Also Trump endorsed. Wisconsin, Nevada, Minnesota, Ohio, New Mexico, Colorado, Kansas, Arkansas, California, Massachusetts all have Trumpy secretaries of state running. Hugely important elections. And it's really important they don't win.
It is.
Go out and vote.
Yes, please do. I mean, only in one of those states. Don't be like the people down there in the villages.
No. If you live in those states,
Yeah, right. Then
vote.
you vote.
And if you don't, support the campaigns against those folks.
Yeah, send money.
Right. And that leads us into the next thing about what do you do about it? And here is a really interesting dilemma. Interesting is doing a lot of work here because it's like awful. Fixing the Electoral Count Act.
Oh, boy. Yes.
The electrical count Act.
Should count the electrical.
How many light bulbs do we have?
How many
insurrectionists does it take to change the light bulb?
Light bulbs
Fixing the
like
Electoral
the
Count Act is no substitute for voting reform.
It
by
is not.
Jennifer Rubin. See, the whole point here is this interesting dilemma. Say for the sake of argument.
All right.
Georgia.
Yes.
Biden wins. Brad Raffensperger, the Republican, decides to give in to Trump and find him those 15,000 some odd votes that Trump was looking for him to find.
Yes.
So then you use those votes to choose electors, and you send them to the Electoral College reunion.
Place. Right. Reunion. Let's get the band back together. Right. Okay. They meet in now. Okay.
Now, which one do you send? Who's your slate? So the point here is Brad Raffensperger, as Secretary of State, decided to go against the will of the people and say, I found other reasons to say that our slate is the right slate, and that's the one that we're going to certify. So they go to Washington.
All right.
And in that case, just as a not just as a procedural rule, but as a general concept, you want Congress to say that's ridiculous. The vote in Georgia was for Biden. Biden was the winner.
You want that.
You want that. On the other hand, let's say that Brad Raffensperger did what he did in real life, and Georgia was declared for Biden.
Yes.
But in this hypothetical, you send the electors to the Electoral College reunion, and the Republicans have the majorities in the House and Senate.
Yes. Okay.
And they say, Georgia, you can't do that. That's wrong. We're going to do something, some rule, some law, something. We have the majority. We can figure it out. Mm-hmm. And we're going to say that Trump won Georgia. And my point is, if the corruption is at the state level, you want Congress to fix it. And if the corruption is at the congressional level, you want the state to fix it. And from a conceptual point of view, that's why it's so difficult to, quote, write a law that fixes the problem, end quote.
Yes.
That's my point.
Okay. Well, yes, you want a law that draws the line, and the line can be broken and the law can be violated, but you'd like it to be clear so that you at least have some hope that people will say. I mean, if everybody says, to hell with the law, then you've lost the country. That's just the way it is.
Right. That's what happens with Supreme Court nominations.
Yeah.
Everybody says, the hell with precedent and everything else, and whatever.
It gets complicated.
Golden rule. Those that have the gold make the rules. That's the way we do things here.
Yeah. Well, that may be the way they decided. It gets very complicated. I'm giving her room to come up with her hypothetical as it happens. By the time Trump calls Brad Raffensperger, the Electoral College has already voted, and there's very little normally that you can do about it. But that good point, true, that a Republican House and Republican Senate could have engineered an objection and decided, they could at least have decided to reject the Biden slate of electors. They might also have been able to engineer a vote endorsing and accepting the Republican slate of electors, purported electors. You want to be able. Look, it's a problem everywhere, certainly, and you want to address the issues up and down the spectrum. The full range of the system. You can't just fix one.
Right, that's exactly the point. You can't just fix one thing. And so, if you're looking at, for example, what Peter Navarro, the coup whisperer, did or was trying to do with this so-called Green Bay sweep, is to convince 100 members of Congress to throw out the old electors and certify new electors. And so the purpose of clarifying the Electoral Count Act, you'll hear this now, and I'll explain why. I'll try to explain why in my limited understanding. So to clarify the Electoral Count Act, that you can't just do that. That if a state legitimately, decides what a slate is, then Congress needs to respect that slate. And so getting rid of loopholes and ambiguities, for example, will not put a next vice president in the position of saying, okay, well, if the vice president decides the election doesn't count, then the election doesn't count, which was really at the heart of what the Green Bay sweep was trying. They wanted Mike Pence as the president of the Senate to say that, okay, well, if the Senate as a whole decides that Raffensperger is wrong and Trump really won, that Pence should say, okay, that's true, and therefore, whatever, and do it in a couple other states so you get enough electoral count so that you can do that. And the calls to clarify the Electoral Count Act is to make sure, as Peter Navarro was told by Ari Melber, it's to stop people like you.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Right. But as you correctly pointed out, in my view, you also have to go back to the states and fix the problems there. That's where the Voting Rights Act comes in.
Right.
And that's where Manchin and Schumer and the Democrats in the Senate are working, because if you're allowed to vote, then the vote is the vote and democracy wins. Win or lose. Sometimes you lose, but at least everybody got a chance to vote. The thing is, the Republicans are getting a little upset that they're talking about ending the filibuster, at least carving out the filibuster on this one issue, because that might mean it passes.
Right.
And so to prevent that from happening, Mitch McConnell is floating the idea that maybe what Republicans should do on a bipartisan basis with Democrats is work a little bit on the Electoral Count Act to clarify some of those things that are legitimate questions that we agree with our Democratic colleagues across the aisle that we should fix.
Yeah.
That's all well and good, but his point, McConnell's point, is if we do these minor tweaks to the end game, we don't have to do anything to fix how we got here at the beginning.
Yes.
And so he wants all the Republicans to vote for this Electoral Count Act minor fix while ignoring the filibuster and the Voting Rights Act. That's the dance that's going on right now, and that's why I bring it up.
That is correct. I think that's exactly what's going on. That's what is causing tension between people whose major focus is state-level voting rights and others whose focus is what happens in Congress, and they are, beginning. I think the idea is to keep them fighting, to have them angry or arguing with one another about which one has to go first, or if you can only get one, which one should it be? But I think probably if you actually have the discussion with them, they'll all say, no, both, but just don't forget the one I'm talking about.
So this brings it back to your point about Karl Rove.
Oh, what was your point about
Karl Rove is right. What's his motive for bringing it up?
Ah, yes, okay.
How could you ask that? What's written here is so clearly right. Why would you question his motives?
Yeah,
well,
why would I?
Mitch McConnell
What's wrong with me?
Is suggesting that Republicans cooperate with the Electoral Count Act. Well, that's correct. Why are you questioning McConnell's motives? Because you have to.
Yeah. That's fine. And you can even go along with him and say, I understand his motives and I don't care.
That's great. We'll vote with you. I don't care. It's a great idea. But we're not dropping what we're doing.
Sure.
And the White House has already said, and Schumer has already said, we're not buying that.
Yeah.
We'll go for it, but Voting Rights Act still needs to be done. In addition, not instead of.
I don't even think that's persuasive to Joe Manchin. Honestly, I think he was...
No, the question is cinema. Because God knows what she thinks.
Yeah, we don't know. That's always true. But I imagine I don't know whether she'll follow anybody's lead. Maybe Manchin's lead. But yeah, I mean, I don't even think that play fools Manchin. He says, I know who I've been talking to about
Well, the Voting Rights Act is his bill.
Yeah, right. And he probably has
That's what he came up with when he didn't like the John Lewis part of it.
Right. So, yeah, I don't think it fools him. I don't know what we think of what's going on in Cinema's head. You never know. She won't tell you. So wait and see is all you can do. You can yell at her if you want. But, okay. Well, yeah, that's true. I don't know. I don't really understand the idea that there's this argument going on. And for a while there was one, but I think both sides of the argument acknowledge, no, we also need that other piece. This is the one I'm writing about.
So Jen Rubin is writing exactly that. And so she says at the end, in sum, there are three sets of discrete problems. The first two, election subversion and election suppression, should be resolved through the Freedom to Vote Act, Manchin's own voting reform bill. The third, the potential for a peaceful presidential coup, requires amendments to the Electoral Count Act.
Yes.
So Democrats must be emphatic with Manchin that reforming ECA is no substitute for addressing the myriad threats to elections as the Freedom to Vote Act would do. And what's going on at the state level obviously is important. And the best way for regular old people who don't get to write these laws and argue behind closed doors about what kind of horse trading should happen over these things is to, if you live in those states, support honest secretaries of state.
Yes.
And if you don't live in those states, support the campaigns. And remember that local elections really super duper matter, whether it's school board or secretary of state.
Yeah, that's true. And if you don't know who the players are, you know when the election is coming. There's this fantastic internet thing that will tell you who's who on the ballot, even if they won't put a party label on themselves. Some races don't allow that. Or maybe you don't care about that and you want to know where they stand. Do some research ahead of time. Take a look at who's on the ballot, what is on the ballot, what questions are being decided. Read it ahead of time. Or take your damn time in the booth. That's okay, too. Don't worry about it. I know the line's long, but make sure you cast your votes from an informed perspective.
Right. So there are many, many, many good takes on January 6th today. I don't mean to say that what I did today was in any way inclusive, all-inclusive, and covers the entire gamut. But I picked out some highlights that I thought were interesting.
I thought so.
And that's my rant for today and this week, and I'll catch up with you on Monday.
All right. Well, excellent. Thanks very much, Greg. There's some. All right. Well, some business being taken care of there, and that was and the Blue Jays, I guess, are at my house. But anyway, thanks, Greg. We'll take it from here. There's a little bit more time to go, but if for our break, if you want to concern yourself with the engineering of the beeps. But I appreciate it. Thanks for coming in for this Thursday. And all your takes were wrong. How's that? He's hung up. All right. Well, I hope I find the Blue Jays and flush them out. I hope they find the boxes there. I hope that we can throw the boxes at the Blue Jays and solve both problems all at once. These are the things you deal with when you headquarter your worldwide radio program at home because of COVID, but also having nothing whatsoever to do with COVID because this is the way we always did it. All right. What do we have on tap in Pocket? We're going to go with Pocket today. Yes, here's one. Well, I don't know if I'm going to have time to get through all of this one, so maybe I'll hold on to that. Do we have anything quicker? Oh, yes. How about this one? I wanted to make note of this as our good listener, friend, and Twitter friend, Dr. Monica, writes in to say, yesterday I made mention of this idea of a new variant emerging and having been discovered. I'm trying to be careful here. The variant having been identified, discovered, announced, what have you, in France. Now, I don't know where it emerged. I don't know anything about that. That doesn't matter. We don't care about that. We're not supposed to. What we should care about, though, is this note from Dr. Monica, who says, well, this is, as she says, a supposedly, quote, new variant in France. And this thread here says, identifying the variant by the weird numbers that the doctors used, the B1642 isn't new. It actually predates Omicron. That I was not aware of. So thank you for bringing us that information. But guess what? It goes on to say it's a sublineage of B1640. That makes sense. The numbers are the same. Which caused some concern back in mid-November, but couldn't even compete with Delta. So this thing was first sequenced over a month ago, was officially recognized as a lineage in December. All right, welcome back now. Even Blue Jays to the Kagro in the Morning Show. I think they're gone now. I'm not crazy. It'll be on the tape. I wonder if anybody heard it over the stream. It would be pretty faint. I think it would be difficult to hear over the stream. But I guess they were at our house, which I wasn't expecting. But I guess what happens is they're cawing or whatever, screeching outside, and the microphone is picking it up and putting it in my ears. And I, of course, mistakenly think of having the headphones on as, more or less canceling the outside noise. They're not really official noise canceling headphones, but they have the effect of, dampening what's actually going on around me, but I hear it through the microphone instead. So anyway, just in case you thought I was crazy. So I will share with Scott so that he can share with you this thread about the technical aspect of this so-called or supposedly new French variant. I guess what happened is that the preprint of the study designating it, identifying and designating this new variant is what's new. But of course, lots of work would have had to have gone on before you get around to writing your article, even in putting it in preprint. You have to do all the thinking and typing first, and that takes a long time. So I will say this. I'm looking at the thread that Dr. Monica has shared with us here, and there's one flaw in it. And it's that the thread is written this way. I told you that there's the announcement that this was all sequenced over a month ago, officially recognized as a lineage in December. Then there's a missing tweet, something that was deleted for whatever reason. But then if you need background info on this, I went over it all here approximately 3 days ago, which, doesn't really mean that the thing isn't new if you talked about it 3 days ago. But anyway, I'm sure that sub-thread explains it a little bit better. But at any rate, Omicron will overwhelm this thing, apparently, according to this view. And it couldn't even, as they said, outcompete Delta. But then the weird part of it here is there's one more. There are several tweets in this thread, but the next one says, and if you won't take my word for it, take it from the actual person who got B1642 designated. And there's a link to the tweet of the person who actually got the thing, apparently got the strain designated, and it will settle all questions, except it says here this tweet, the link says, this tweet was deleted by the tweet author. So I don't know how much credence to put in this. And they may have made just a punctuation error and then later reissued the exact same substance in a different tweet. But it doesn't look that good, right? If you don't take my word for it, take it from the actual person who actually discovered this thing. Oh, actually, I retract my statement about discovering the thing. Oh, ugh. Okay. Well, at any rate, I can buy into the whole idea that, yeah, we might not, have understood correctly exactly what was going on with the reporting from virologists in France. So, okay, we'll take a much more laid-back attitude toward that one. There, I'm sure, will be other variants. I'm in no rush to get any new ones. Omicron is bad enough. It is kind of crazy how quickly it's spreading. Look, I don't know, we're asymptomatic so far. That doesn't mean we didn't get it yesterday when our son came home from school. That doesn't mean we haven't had it for a week and just haven't had a test and don't know it yet. So that's one of the weird dangers of this Omicron thing. All right, I'll jump back into Pocket. I'll bring you what I was thinking of dredging up just before the break. And now I've waited for after. A popular diary over at Daily Kos. You may recognize the popular diarist behind it. He's actually Kos, and it's his daily. So maybe you have seen this. I just grabbed this thing from obscurity. I just wanted to give it a little bit of extra bandwidth. I thought the story was interesting in terms of how crazy are Trump QAnon cult weirdos today. And the answer comes in this headline: Trump cultists, spelled with a Q, get it? Trump Q cultists can't believe their hero supports vaccination. Watch them freak out. Well, I knew that this was going to happen, and you knew that was going to happen, and you all saw it in real time when Trump has mentioned the vaccine in live events and he gets booed. But I grabbed it because there's this, I just thought it was really interesting. This write-up, where is he borrowing from here? I guess the write-up is of an interview. I guess Trump does an interview with Bill O'Reilly, who's still alive, and tells him that he's vaccinated and boosted. And there's, I guess, some live audience and some booing going on, and he tries to defend himself. But what's interesting here is the screen grabs from Facebook threads that are then reproduced through screenshots, edited, with the names obscured, and then posted on Reddit. And which Reddit is it? It's on Parler Watch, by the way. Seeing what these loons on Parler are saying to one another. So that's interesting. So I guess what's happening is they're saying this stuff on Parler, then someone is screenshotting that and posting it on Facebook, and now Parler Watch Reddit has pictures of the Facebook post of the pictures of what happened on Parler. Just trying to get things straight here for you. We need, in case you have to establish a chain of custody for the evidence. Anyway, so what sorts of things are these idiots saying to one another about the fact that their big hero, heard you met your big hero, and he got not only vaccinated but boosted. This is the sort of things they say to one another. President Trump was speaking in code not meant for his supporters. He knows we are smart enough not to get the V. And by that we hope they mean vaccine. Could mean any number of things, and they're probably not getting either one of them. But just pointing that out there. Interesting also, some very Trump-like random capitalization of words. When he says he knows we are smart enough not to get the V, the smart is capitalized for some reason. Other weirdos commenting, don't believe it. Everything he says has a double meaning. In my stories is a post with the brilliant Cliff High, whoever that is. He will explain beautifully what he means. First, remember, the jab is not a vaccine. This is one of those things that they like to say to one another. By the way, YouTube, that's not me saying it. That's one of the crazy people saying it. That's their stupid theory that because it's not an inactivated virus being used as the main active ingredient of the vaccine, therefore it's not a vaccine in their view, and their view is wrong and stupid, and we don't care about it. But anyway, that's one of the things they say to one another. In case you haven't run into that one. Let's see. Somebody, I guess, asking questions about that with the first guy who says, well, this is all a code. Do you think Trump knows that? Asks somebody who's a little skeptical about it. Answer, Trump is a genius. If we know it's not a vaccine, I bet you he does too. That you should be sure that a genius would know. But okay. Other comments. The problem is Trump doesn't admit mistakes. He created this deadly poison, so he'll try to convince people who still believe him to take it, no matter how much harm it does to them. It's a very interesting take from among these weirdos. And then a couple more here. He believes his base is all comprised of free thinkers. And he knows we know that it is not a vaccine because it isn't. He knows we will not. There's no punctuation in this. And, I mean, did that guy just say, he knows that we know that it's not a vaccine because it isn't? Like, I mean, I think that's what he meant to say, which is not, even if punctuated properly, a thing that makes any sense. I mean, I guess it. He knows that we know it's not a vaccine, and we know it's not a vaccine because it isn't. Well, that's just a misuse of the word because, but you might believe that it isn't. Anyway, we'll move on from this guy. He has more to say. He knows that we know that it's not a vaccine because it isn't. He knows we will not be, it says talking, but I think he means taking the thing because, oh, wait a minute. He knows that we will not be taking the thing that the satanics are mandating. So there you go. People who believe in the vaccine, particularly, or at least those who mandate it, are satanics on top of it all. And I guess Satan stole all his punctuation. What else? Last one here. Do you, I guess, think, believe? Some missing word here. Do you believe that to be true? Trump says something, and don't expect his supporters, followers, not to believe what he says. He said vaccines and boosters, and he took both, but he didn't mean it. Far-fetched analysis of Trump's thinking process. However, to be fair, he said he doesn't want vaccines to be mandated. Okay, and that's the most normal take of all of them. That guy actually doesn't believe that this is some sort of wink-wink code. But that's what these guys are out there saying to one another, that yes, I saw on video, you're right, that Trump did say that he got vaccinated and got boosted. But what you have to understand about Trump is he's a secret genius, and this is code to the rest of us. Wink, wink. I know I have to say on TV that I believe in the vaccine and that you should get it, because otherwise the cancel culture will come for me. But what I really mean is, and you're smart enough to know this, I mean the opposite of what I'm saying. So, all right. Well, we here mean the opposite of that, and you should absolutely get the vaccine.
Oh my fucking God, get the fucking vaccine already, you fucking fucks.
Right, and Greg says it best. You know that's the way to do it. And by the way, if you're ever speaking to Trump, look out for this.
We found a way in other states later. Excuse me.
Yeah, excuse me. All right, well, anyway. I just wanted you to know, just how far gone these guys were. I know you knew that they were far gone, but I bet you didn't know just how far gone. Unless, of course, you read this obscure diary by this Coast guy. Anyway, here's something I think might be an interesting take for January 6th, and I wonder if it's related in any way or whether they're doing any work with the folks that Greg mentioned. What were we talking about from the PRRI guys and their new effort, Uncivil Religion? That was an interesting thing. And the fact that he says, okay, how did they describe it? Uncivil Religion, a new digital resource tracing the threads of religion throughout the events at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, and developed in collaboration with the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. That rang a bell for me, but then I didn't hear his name called in this, so I wondered whether I remembered it correctly, and I think I do. I have here a New York Times, I have in my hand, a New York Times opinion piece from today, how January 6th might look in 2086, sort of a best guess at how history will look back on it. And that is an interesting question and an interesting angle. And what makes it even more interesting and connected to what Greg was talking about, it is written by John Grinspan and Peter Manseau. Peter Manseau, most famous in our circles as the author of Melancholy Accidents, a guy who was early on fascinated by the gun fail threads and the gun fail themes, and aimed in his book, I don't know, maybe it wasn't the aim, but ended up in his book demonstrating that actually gun fail is something that's been with us for a long time, and a lot of the gun enthusiasts who insisted that back in the day when everybody was armed, we taught our kids about these weapons and how to handle them and how to respect them, and we didn't have this many accidents, and we didn't have accidental shootings and people who didn't know what they were doing, handling firearms and making mistakes. And the truth is, we had it all the time. We had it all along because guns do this thing. And people are pretty much just about as smart across history as they are now, and that means some of them will have accidentally shot themselves and others. Anyway, Peter Manseau, more frequently cited, especially these days, for his interesting work about the intersection of politics, culture, and religion generally. And he actually has been focusing a great deal lately, in the last year or so, on the religious threads running through the events of January 6th. So I figure they must be collaborating. And it's also worth pointing out that, one, he's got a doctorate. Both of them do. So it says here in the note underneath their byline, Dr. Grinspan and Dr. Manseau are curators at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. So I can't believe that they're not working in conjunction at some level with the Uncivil Religion folks that Greg brought up. So anyway, here's their view of this. I think this is kind of an interesting idea. We'll see how it goes. The year is 2086. It's not. YouTube, don't take me down. I'm not saying I'm time traveling. It's not a weird conspiracy. This is their pretending that the year is 2086. At an unveiling ceremony in the United States Capitol's Statuary Hall, visitors listened to august speeches about a dark day long ago when patriots fought to defend democracy. The crowd breaks into applause as the cloth covering the new statue falls away. Marble megaphone aloft, headdress and horns gleaming, the QAnon shaman of January 6, 2021 takes his place among the heroes of American history. Ugh, wait a minute. Where's my sad trombone sound? You definitely don't want to live in that future. It seems far-fetched, or if it does, that a notorious insurgent could be given such a place of honor. The past begs to differ. This is why I love this stuff, right? Historical perspective. You never know what people are going to think 100 years from now, and what sheen history will put on it, and it depends on who wins in the future and what they push as reality these days. But here you go. The past begs to differ, right? When the Confederate president Jefferson Davis was imprisoned after the Civil War, rumored to be dressed at the time of his arrest in his own outlandish costume, very widely rumored that he had, I guess, put on women's garb of the day and attempted to escape that way. But you could describe that as an outlandish costume, I guess, to make the parallel with the QAnon shaman. Well, when he was imprisoned after the Civil War, he was more reviled and mocked than any Capitol rioter, and his crimes were far more serious. But his statue joined George Washington's in the Capitol 65 years later. Isn't that odd? As curators at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, we are regularly confronted by hard physical evidence of just how slippery the past can be. Materials brought in by curators long ago take on unanticipated meanings. Objects that we've collected, which seem almost to speak for themselves when we catalog them, may find totally different use behind glass decades from now. That's an interesting way of putting it, too. And again, remember, his interesting perspective, most interesting perspective, for my purposes, has been, oh no, you like to think that the times were different back in the frontier days when everybody had firearms and knew how to use them, but the truth is, the people then documented the accidents that they had all the time. Anyway, it is chilling, but not impossible, to envision the signs screaming, "Stop the Steal," picked up on the garbage-strewn National Mall on January 7th, 2021, treated one day as patriotic treasures, displayed alongside the writing desk Thomas Jefferson used to draft the Declaration of Independence, or the inkwell Abraham Lincoln dipped into to compose the Emancipation Proclamation. When the mob first breached the halls of Congress, the bewilderment on their faces indicated that many had not planned to storm into history, and yet, as their allies have worked over the year to minimize the assault, many of us have looked toward the future, hoping for some clarity on our chaotic era. When all is finally known, we tell ourselves, there will be no disputing who was responsible for this singular attack on the workings of our democracy. Their names will live in infamy. Oh, every time you have infamy and live in, you got to say it that way. History, we want to believe, will judge them harshly. In fact, we just read an essay yesterday that said, don't take the enormous political risk of prosecuting Donald Trump. Let history judge him. Well, what if history is stupid? Have we thought about that possibility? Because frequently it ends up that way. I don't think that Manso would put it that way, but, that's what I'm distilling out of it. History can be as dumb as anything else. History, however, may have other plans than, say, to judge them harshly. Contrary to the mantra, it has no right or wrong side. A generation after secession, the renowned historian James Ford Rhodes declared, "The judgment of posterity is made up. It was an unrighteous cause which the South defended by arms, at the very moment that statues of Confederate generals were being placed on pedestals throughout the nation." Rhodes was wrong not in his reading of the Confederacy, but in his faith in the judgment of posterity. Good point. Judging, it turns out, isn't history's strong suit. Notions of justice change radically over time, and they are not the reason we collect, preserve, or display objects from the past. To curators and historians, the evolving meaning of our objects is far more fascinating than whom they label as unrighteous. The collections of the Smithsonian contain, for instance, pikes from John Brown's failed slave rebellion in the South in 1859. At different moments since then, his pikes have symbolized a demented terrorist's scheme for mass murder, a religious fanatic's fiery crusade, and a hero's lonely struggle for justice. You can see how that happens, right? President Andrew Jackson's dueling pistols, once proof of the aggressive populism of a fighter honored in democratic banquets and the names of generations of boys, now could not be displayed without mention of the ethnic cleansing of Native Americans, for which he often fought. Moments that outwardly resemble January 6th, involving both violent mobs and their powerful enablers, have proved particularly ripe for revision, following a familiar pattern of normalization and valorization. When gangs of anti-Catholic bigots rampaged through a convent in Charlestown, Massachusetts, before burning it to the ground in 1834, it was among the most explosive flare-ups of the 19th century's rampant nativism. Yet, in the wake of the attack, no less a figure than the telegraph developer and vocal immigration opponent, Samuel Morse, sounded eerily like recent apologists defending the so-called political prisoners of January 6th. The quote, "I know of no one who justifies the illegal violence," he opined, "but I unhesitatingly say that the feeling of indignation which animated the populace was a just and proper feeling." All right, they burned down a convent. And Samuel Morse, hero of American industrialism. Okay, wow. Nothing in our past, no matter how blatant it may seem to us today, is guaranteed eternal condemnation. Even bloody anti-democratic coups can find their moments. In the aftermath of the 1872 Louisiana governor's election, won by a multiracial Republican coalition, 56 to 43%, the losing white supremacist Democrats launched 2 uprisings, murdered policemen, warred with federal troops in the streets of New Orleans, and even captured the former Confederate General James Longstreet, then fighting against the coup. Wow. An obelisk commemorating the second of those insurrections went up in New Orleans 18 years after the shooting stopped and came down only in 2017. These are all great points. Of course, our immediate future may shape the distant memory of January 6th. The elections of 2022, this year, and 24 will help determine whether the big lie becomes the official truth. And that deserves some dramatic music. One might even prefer the horror dramatic music, right? We have our choice. Take your pick. Already, a significant segment of the population has embraced fictions about the Capitol attack. In a national poll recently released by the University of Massachusetts, more than 30% of respondents said they do not accept the legitimacy of President Biden's 2020 victory, and 25% opposed investigating those who sought to overturn the election. We've heard those numbers before. Our recent reckoning with American history has shown the indelible impact of staid forms of institutional power, like dedicating monuments, inscribing plaques, and holding hearings. Enshrining rioters as heroes could be done fairly quietly. Those living in a bubble of fake news have shown their willingness to also fake history. After the 1776 Commission and state-level bans on teaching about America's racist past, we should be ready to see the whitewashing of January 6th as well. History also shows that unknowable politics of the distant future will color the memory of January 6th, like latter-day rebels who have embraced the Confederate flag as a hazy symbol of Southern heritage, white supremacy, and general misanthropy. January 6th could be honored by people who share little more than a desire to offend, or a national reconciliation after our age of division is finally over might lead Americans to both sides this history into meaninglessness, displaying riot shields from far-right terrorists and liberal counter-protesters side by side in museums as moral equivalents. And no matter who wins the history wars of the future, the horrific attack on the Capitol will likely bore school kids one day, quizzed on Bunker Hill, the Compromise of 1850, the Battle of the Bulge, and January 6th, whatever that was. Our trauma will be their homework. There's no controlling what the future will say about us. Generations just keep coming, reevaluating old heroes and asking new questions. Children present at the unveiling of the Capitol's Shaman statue in 2086, should that or other mind-boggling commemorations come to pass, could grow up to challenge their parents' narratives about January 6th. Maybe the Smithsonian's objects from the day, the dusty suit of a congressman who helped clean up the Capitol after the attack, the badges worn by National Guard members who protected Washington in the aftermath, the signs with religious and political slogans rioters used to justify violence. Maybe they'll help guide those young people to a reading of the past that is based in evidence. We cannot know. We have no ownership over what is to come. The best we can do is map our moment scrupulously, to preserve the signposts that will lead to a place we'll never see. Very eloquently put there. As curators, as historians, as citizens, we are frequently reminded that the past is a foreign country, but so is the future. That is a very interesting perspective on this thing, and a scary thought. And I guess a good reminder of another reason that maybe we hadn't given enough consideration to continue with this investigation and the importance of documenting what happened, even if it doesn't lead to prosecution.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We've got a little bit of time left here together before we go and find out what the rest of the day holds for us. I note the note from the mighty OCD, our good Twitter friend and fellow traveler in KITM, saying, from all the quotes I'm seeing go by in my feed, and I've seen quite a few myself, this is a great speech by Biden, giving, I guess, a commemoration, or not commemoration of the insurrection, I guess, so much as don't forget, sort of a memorial of what happened. And I haven't been able to monitor what actually has been said, but I have seen a lot of people making mention of the speech, and some in praise and some not so much, but okay, we'll have to catch up with that tomorrow. But thanks for calling it to our attention. And those of you wondering why it's not rating mention at the moment, remember it's difficult to listen to the speech and do your own show at the same time. It's just a tough thing to do. So I am all about history, like what happened yesterday or the day before that I put aside for sharing with you other people's recollections of those histories. So let's see, a couple of stories I wanted to share with you. There are a few. One interesting development in filibuster reform world, and I skeptically opened up this piece after seeing the headline tweeted by The Hill, and I wondered, all right, well, I'll just check as I kind of feel like I have to. What's in this one here? Manchin floats modest Senate rules changes. Oh, all right. I'll take a look. He probably didn't. And The Hill is just using it as clickbait. But then I read it ahead of time yesterday, and I said, all right, I think I'll share that one. I figured this was going to be him saying, well, I'm for the talking filibuster, and I think we should force the Republicans to hold the floor. And I've seen him float occasionally like, oh, well, maybe we could do something like reverse the burden of keeping a filibuster going by saying, rather than requiring 60 affirmative votes for cloture, you might have to have 60 affirmative votes to keep going, or something like that. And I've heard those things before, and I just wanted to make sure, was it that warmed over, or was it something different? And I adjudged it to be at least something slightly different. Jordan Carney, reporting for The Hill on this one, Joe Manchin on Tuesday night floated smaller changes to the Senate rules that would stop short of the filibuster reforms being pushed for by many of his Democratic colleagues. So let's find out where he is. Manchin, coming out of a meeting with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and other Democrats involved in the negotiations, didn't pledge to vote for any specific rules reforms, but appeared open to smaller changes. I think the filibuster needs to stay in place anyway, or rather, any way, shape, or form that we can do it, Manchin said. Asked about keeping the current rule that requires most legislation to get 60, you know what it is. Manchin added that he was still optimistic that Republicans could back smaller changes to the Senate rules with an eye toward making it easier to get bills onto the Senate floor for debate. So what he's talking about here is the idea of making motions to proceed either non-debatable or possibly just time-limited, so that you can't filibuster both the motion to proceed and then filibuster the underlying bill as well. It's explained this way. One idea Manchin said he would support would be getting rid of the 60-vote hurdle currently required to start debate on legislation. Manchin has raised potentially scrapping the procedural roadblock in talks he's had with GOP senators on the Senate's rules. There's a rules change that I think Republicans, or that's a rules change I think Republicans, they've been for that before, Manchin said, and that does not guarantee that they will be for it again when push comes to shove, but at least it's a starting point. So that's something they've been for before, while noting that it wouldn't change the ability for Republicans to use the filibuster to block senators from ending debate on the bill and moving to final passage. So that's a good move. And for those of you looking for the technical explanation of it or the technical reference for it, remember it would be rules change involving the ability to filibuster the motion to proceed to a bill. Or in layman's terms, there should only be the filibuster, in Manchin's view, to end debate on a bill, not to also to begin debate on a bill. But that is technically untrue. What's happening is you're filibustering to prevent the end of debate on the question of whether or not you'll begin debate on the bill. So it's always a debate about ending debate. And it's kind of important to keep that clear in your head, even if that explanation of it didn't help you do it. Manchin also said that he wanted to put, quote, power back in the hands of committees. Senators have previously discussed streamlining the ability for bills that come out of Senate committees with significant support to be able to get an up or down vote on the Senate floor. Currently, one senator can block a quick vote and force leadership to eat up days of floor time and overcome the 60-vote filibuster. That's the normal state of affairs. I guess what he's proposing here is if a bill has strong bipartisan support as it comes out of committee, maybe if it meets some certain threshold of support, however you measure that, I'm not sure, and they don't have a mechanism in place yet, but you could create one. If a bill were to meet that threshold, then perhaps it would either move directly to the floor or directly at least to the schedule, or the motion to proceed would be time limited or non-debatable or something like that. That's a way of arranging things. Manchin said that Democrats were also talking about the idea of a talking filibuster, where opponents could slow down a bill for as long as they could hold the floor, but there were questions about how, under such a change, how do you get off of it? That is, I guess, once again, a question of what closes debate. By the way, of course, a talking filibuster is available without any rules changes whatsoever. The real, actual existing rules, which they usually don't operate under because it's just too much of an annoyance and eats up too much floor time and makes it impossible to deal with any sort of expansive agenda in the Senate. The actual rule is that, yes, in the debate on any given bill, if you just keep that one bill on the floor and nothing else and don't interrupt that business for any other purpose, there's a limitation on how many times any one senator may rise to speak to the subject. So if you basically allow every senator 2 shots at staying on their feet as long as they can possibly hold the floor, and make it an actual exercise in endurance, the old talking filibuster, then eventually they exhaust themselves. The problem is if you have 50 dedicated senators who will all take 2 turns at filibustering for as long as they can, it could take forever. That bill has to be really worth it, in order to use the current rules to enforce a talking filibuster. So that, is not really particularly helpful. You never see that used as a way around the filibuster. The idea would be once all senators had exhausted the number of opportunities they were allotted under the rules to speak, and there was no one else who could, under the rules, be recognized to speak, then the only thing there is to do is put the question, 60 votes or not. That's the issue. You only need 60 votes if you want to finish debate via cloture, by declaring that it doesn't matter if senators have time left to speak or opportunities left to speak. We're shutting off debate. As long as you're not going that route, you just wait until nobody asks to speak on a bill anymore and you put the question. It's just that could take months and maybe more. So now they're looking to kind of come up with a solution that would maybe be a condensed version of this. And the question that remains is, how do you determine when you're done with a filibuster that's a talking filibuster? Is it the moment somebody stops talking or sits down and the other person takes a second too long to rise? Is it something like that? Is it a matter of votes? So let's see. The rest of the article says, supporters of a talking filibuster want to structure it so that opponents can delay a bill for as long as they can hold the Senate floor, but after they are done talking, senators would then be able to pass a bill with a simple majority, effectively nixing the current 60-vote threshold required for most bills to advance in the Senate. That, of course, is a misunderstanding of what the 60-vote threshold is all about, and I guess a misunderstanding of the fact that that's the current state of the rules, actually, right now. But Manchin indicated that he still wants to keep a supermajority requirement to end debate, which is weird because that would be a new addition to the rules, but that he was supportive of changing it from requiring 60 votes needed to break a filibuster to 3/5 of senators present and voting. Under that shift, senators could break the filibuster with fewer than 60 votes if there were absences. You will recall, of course, that in the great but also terrible compromise that created the 60-vote threshold, the issue at the time was they were debating the old school filibuster, the pre-1975 filibuster, in which 2/3 was the threshold necessary to invoke cloture, but that the 2/3 was measured by those present and voting. And that in the compromise of lowering it to 3/5 down from 2/3, yes, that was a lower number in a full Senate anyway, but the requirement was that it be 3/5 of those senators duly chosen and sworn. That is, of all senators, as they call it, the constitutional 3/5. That it is 3/5 of all the senators there are, no matter who's present and who is not. Whereas if it was 3/5 of those present and voting, you would have to summon back, at least at a minimum, summon back all of the senators from the filibustering side every time you wanted to have a vote on cloture. Right, so the way it's set up now, knowing that you got to have 3/5 of those duly chosen and sworn, so it's 60 no matter who's there. All you have to do is absent yourself if you want to help sustain a filibuster. There's no work involved at all. You don't have to hold the floor, and you don't have to show up for votes. In fact, if you don't, it's better. But if it's 3/5 of those present and voting, then at least they have to drag your ass back to the floor, and there's some physical output here that you have to make. You have to make a physical effort to help your friends sustain the filibuster. Somebody's got to hold the floor. Eventually, it'll become your turn to hold the floor, but every time they try to call the question, you have to come back and vote no. So it might help, and I'll take it if you can get the votes for it. The problem, of course, is that if it's a rules change, which it would be, 3/5 of those present and voting instead of 3/5 of those duly chosen and sworn, you'd have to change that in the rule. I guess you could just try a precedent and overrule the written rules just like you did with the nuclear option. But you'd either have to get 50 votes to do it in nuclear style or 2/3 of the Senate to agree to change the rules that only 3/5 are necessary for present and voting, because the rules state that any changes to the standing rules of the Senate, if under debate and you're looking for cloture on that debate, will require 2/3 vote. But if they absent themselves, then maybe they could make it to that, because that threshold is still present and voting. All right, well, it puts pressure on both sides, Manchin said. I'm for 3/5 voting. That, to me, makes a lot of sense. It's better than nothing. I'll take it. We'll see how it works. But they may be very dedicated to providing that constant 2/5 anyway. The meeting with Manchin comes as Schumer has vowed to force a vote on, I think, changes, it says chances, but changes to the Senate's legislative filibuster by January 17th. That'd be 11 days from now, if Republicans block voting rights legislation, as they are expected to. Republicans have used the filibuster to block 2 election-related bills and a separate bill, we'll say, earlier this year to expand and strengthen the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which the Supreme Court hates. Schumer, during a press conference earlier Tuesday with reporters, said that there had been many serious discussions with Manchin about potential changes to the Senate rules. Manchin, of course, would prefer to deal with Republicans, Schumer said, but I believe he knows that we will not get any Republican cooperation. To change the rules without GOP support, Democrats would need to use the nuclear option that allows them to force through rules changes, really just impose a new precedential interpretation, not make rules changes, by a simple majority. Because the Senate is evenly divided, that would require the support of all 50 members of the Senate Democratic Caucus and Vice President Harris in the chair to break a tie. But Manchin hasn't committed to backing a party line rules change, even if it left the filibuster intact, and said earlier Tuesday that it is his preference that any reforms to the Senate rules are bipartisan. In addition to Manchin, Senator Kyrsten Sinema has indicated recently that she remains supportive of the 60-vote legislative filibuster and wary of the idea of creating a carve-out that would exempt voting rights from the hurdle while leaving it in place for other bills. Manchin declined to say how he would vote if Schumer forces the rules vote, telling reporters, "I'm not going to say yes or no because I don't know what votes are going to come to the floor." Well, I guess he's still waiting to see the language behind it, but it's not a good bet. He seems hung up on the idea of doing rules change under regular order, no matter what the rules change is, even if it's the one he suggested. It sounds like he would vote against his own proposed rules change if it wasn't done under regular order. And if it was done under regular order, it would be subject to a filibuster, cloture of which would have to get 2/3 of the Senate on record in favor of cloture, though at least they would have to show up and cast that vote. They couldn't simply hide in their offices and have the work done for them by the rules. Does everybody get that? Hope so. If not, we can spend another week on it at some later date. But it really was something of a new development, I think, on that front. So well worth sharing. Let's see. I'll save this one for later and jump back into Pocket. What did that remind me of? Somewhere along the way I was reading through this article and I said, oh yeah, there's something from the Twitter feed about that. But no, now I've lost that train of thought and didn't make a note to myself. All right. let's jump to another issue. This one, let's see. I think I've got this put aside. Did Scott send this one? I can't recall. I think so. Yeah, he may have texted this one over about the Ohio National Guard and their vaccine mandate, just to bring us up to date on what's going on there. We heard about the Oklahoma one, and similarly, I guess, Ohio dragging its feet as well. And in the Republican tradition, they might be saying, well, sure, even if the courts end up deciding that the Oklahoma National Guard has to get vaccinated, that's Oklahoma. It doesn't say Ohio in this ruling, so this doesn't apply to me. What's up here? From Axios, out of Columbus, is what it looks like. Like, do they have local reporters? Unvaxxed members put Ohio National Guard's aid into question. This is a good reaction from the administration. They can fix this, of course. Tyler Buchanan writes this piece. Ohio has reached something of a paradox stage of the pandemic. This is an interesting twist. The state again set a new record for COVID-19 hospitalizations on Tuesday, 6,257 per the Ohio Hospital Association, a figure driven by unvaccinated Ohioans, leading to crowded hospitals and staff burnout. So what do you do about something like that? Well, Governor Mike DeWine has responded by mobilizing the Ohio National Guard to assist these hospitals. Yes, but with nearly half of its members unvaccinated, it's unclear how much help the Guard can be. Uh-oh. Next little blurb here, by the numbers, just 53% of the Guard's membership is vaccinated, per the State House News Bureau, a few percentage points below the total state population. Adjutant General John Harris, Jr., who leads the Guard, is mandating that members be vaccinated by March 31st. They have a mandate. It's just far enough out there that it's not particularly helpful and might not be particularly serious. The state of play, as Axios likes to put it, is DeWine has already deployed hundreds of Guard members to serve in hospitals in Columbus, Cleveland, and Toledo. A Monday announcement of 1,250 additional members brings the total number asked to serve in healthcare facilities to 2,300. Hundreds are also needed to assist with nearly a dozen mass testing sites being set up across the state. The Columbus testing site is now open at the first floor of the parking garage if you are in Columbus. Where? Parking garage at 2540. Oh, why did I even start this? What is this? Olentangy River Road? I don't know. How do you pronounce it? Olentangy River Road. Boy, I knew I shouldn't have gotten into the address. But what if you're there? What if you're there and you're in Columbus and you're looking for testing and I don't tell you where it is? What if you're there and I pronounce this thing so badly that you don't have any idea where to go? Olentangy? Oh, I have no idea. People from Columbus, let me know. Appointments are needed, by the way, so make sure you go ahead and make one. But I bet if you're rolled up, maybe they'd help you out. Down at the bottom here, it says what they're saying, and then there's a quote, which I think is the Axios way of saying, well, I asked around, I did my interviews, I got a quote here from somebody who's important, but I can't fit it into the story. It doesn't make any sense, so just throw it on at the end. What they're saying. Quote, end of March is a long time to wait to get ready, but I'm giving the soldiers the benefit of the doubt. Harris, the Adjutant General, told the State House News Bureau as to why, what good is a mandate with a deadline of March 31st? And his answer is, it isn't, but I'm doing it anyway. So there you have it. So you see what's happening here? The hospitals in Ohio are in crisis. They need help. The governor wants to call up the National Guard to help them, but the National Guardsmen are not vaccinated, and they don't even have much in the way of a strong mandate to encourage them to get vaccinated quickly. Although you might think, being sent to work at a testing site where people are apt to have COVID would convince you. But if you haven't gotten it yet, maybe that's not the best tool to convince you. Another good tool to convince you would be having the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States nationalize and call up the Ohio Guard, thereby putting them under the National Armed Forces deadlines. And also, of course, you could just have them report for training and inject them all against their will, even right there, and then just demobilize them afterwards, by the way. Or you could then send them to the hospital to help out in Ohio or elsewhere, for that matter. Why not send them to the Texas border to hang around and look at people and do nothing? Although that does bring me to a story I have had pocketed for a while and never brought up. I want to scroll down. It was just never the right day to bring it up. Can I find it even? If I can't, I can tell you what it was. Oh, yeah, here we are. From the Army Times. From when? December 23rd. Waves of suicides hits Texas National Guard's border mission. 4 soldiers have taken their own lives in 2 months. That seems unusual and weird. Davis Winkie, I guess, W-I-N-K-I-E, writes this piece for the Army Times. And it looks rather lengthy, but I'll give you a flavor for what's going on here. PFC Joshua R. Cortez was preparing to accept a lifetime job with one of the nation's biggest health insurance companies in late October. But the Texas National Guard had other ideas. The state's mission to guard its borders with Mexico, known as Operation Lone Star, was rapidly expanding, and that meant involuntary activations were necessary to meet Governor Greg Abbott's troop quotas. Cortez was one of the soldiers tapped to go on state active duty orders, with no idea how long the mission would last. I've been waiting for this job, and I'm on my way to getting hired, the 21-year-old mechanic wrote in his request for a hardship release from the mission. I missed my first opportunity in September when I had to go on the flood mission in Louisiana. I cannot miss this opportunity because it's my last opportunity for this lifetime job. I guess he means sort of job of a lifetime, one he's been waiting for. Cortez's company commander recommended approval, but his battalion commander and brigade commander, Colonel Robert Crockham of the 176th Engineer Brigade, disapproved, writing, "Soldier can deploy. If offered a job, then soldier can be given time for training." Crockham signed the form at 8:19 p.m. on November 4th. Sometime in the next 36 hours, Cortez drove to a parking lot in northwest San Antonio and shot himself in the head. First responders found him at 7:40 a.m. on November 6th. Cortez and 3 other soldiers tied to Operation Lone Star have died by suspected suicide in the past 2 months, according to family members. Guard troops currently on the mission and official documents obtained by the Army Times. There's Sergeant Jose L. de Hoyos, who was found dead in Laredo, Texas on October 26th. He was a member of the 949th Brigade Support Battalion's headquarters company. Cortez died overnight on November 6th. First Sergeant John Kenny Crutcher died on November 12th as time ran out on his temporary hardship waiver. He was a top NCO for B Company, 3rd Battalion, 144th Infantry. First Lieutenant Charles Williams, platoon leader in Crutcher's company, died at home overnight on December 17th while on pass. The string of suicides raises urgent questions about the mission's conditions and purpose, as well as the way it's organized and manned through indefinite involuntary call-ups, according to the Texas Army National Guard's former enlisted top soldier. Operation Lone Star is a separate mission from the federally controlled National Guard Task Force on the U.S.-Mexico border, which was the subject of a previous Army Times investigation. So thanks, Greg Abbott, and for supporting the troops. It's been really great. I didn't even intend to land on that today, but I'm glad. Sometimes you hit on something in a story on your way through it that reminds you of something else important, and you get that opportunity. You're just going to have to jump on it and share it that way. Okay. Well, it's about time for us to wrap up here, actually. So we had an interesting collection of stories to share with you here today. Tomorrow being Friday, we plan on coming back and sharing more odd things with you, and hopefully no news whatsoever about the events of January 6th, except perhaps maybe we should take a look at what the president had to say about these things and what others are saying in the more civil memorials about the subject. And hopefully events are such that we can ignore the output from the other side from today. All right. We, of course, are always, as always, followed up by Justice Putnam's program, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And guess what? Today we have some time to actually read you much more about what's coming up. Let's take advantage of that, shall we? Starting off in the Bistro Cafe. In even more bad news for Trump, new information shows that there are multiple sources with firsthand knowledge of Trump's activities during the Capitol insurrection on January 6th. I don't know if you can believe this, but he was watching television. Wow! That's actually what he was doing, believe it or not. Then on the rest of the menu, in another Biden in disarray story, we'll see if that's tongue-in-cheek, the December jobs report, yes, from payroll company ADP, surpassed economists' expectations by more than double. But do note, please, that at least one of those 800,000 jobs was farting in a bottle. Virginia officials were a little icy as they defended their response to the 30-hour snowy gridlock on I-95. Yeah, well, more about that as we continue the Netroots Radio Day after this.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
One more domestic story to share with you. The Trump-appointed U.S. Prisons Director is finally resigning after a crisis-filled tenure. Yes, there is international news, of course, but with the music winding down and the prospect of pronouncing foreign-sounding names ahead of me, I bow out gracefully and allow justice to take it from here. We'll see you tomorrow.